The cruel husband beat his black wife because of his mistress, but she had an abortion, and he regretted it, but at that day. Hazel and Kane Williamson's love story began like a fairy tale in the heart of Atlanta. She was the daughter of a prominent civil rights attorney, carrying on her father's legacy by fighting for justice in the courtrooms. He was a rising star in the corporate world, known for his innovative approaches to business and charismatic leadership style. Their paths crossed at a charity gala where Kane was immediately captivated by Hazel's passionate speech about educational equality. Their courtship was the stuff of modern romance novels. Kane would send handwritten notes to her office, each one containing a quote from her favorite authors, Maya Angelou, Toni Morrison, and James Baldwin. Hazel found herself drawn to his genuine interest in her work and his willingness to learn about perspectives different from his own. Their dinner conversations would stretch into the early hours of morning, discussing everything from social justice to their dreams of building a family together. The society pages couldn't get enough of them. Here was a power couple that seemed to bridge every divide, cultural, racial, and social. Their wedding at the Botanical Gardens was featured in several magazines, with photographs capturing their genuine joy and the beautiful blend of their family's traditions. Kane's mother, initially hesitant about their relationship, had become one of Hazel's strongest advocates, often defending her at country club gatherings where whispers still circulated. They bought a stunning Victorian house in the historic district, renovating it to perfection while preserving its character. Their home became a gathering place for friends and family, hosting dinner parties where conversations about art, politics, and social change flowed as freely as the wine. Hazel's law firm colleagues admired how Kane supported her late nights during big cases, while his business partners praised how Hazel helped refine his company's diversity initiatives. On their third anniversary, they started talking about having children. They visited fertility specialists, painted a nursery in gentle earth tones, and began collecting children's books that reflected both their heritages. Kane would catch Hazel in the nursery sometimes, running her hands over the crib they'd chosen together, both of them imagining the family they would build. But success came with its demands. Kane's company expanded rapidly, requiring more of his time and attention. The late nights at the office began to multiply. The thoughtful notes became quick texts. The long conversations over dinner turned into rushed takeout, eaten while checking emails. Hazel noticed the changes, but attributed them to the natural ebb and flow of a busy professional couple's life. Their social media still painted the picture of perfection. Charity galas, vacation photos from exotic locations, loving anniversary posts with carefully chosen words. But the captions couldn't capture the growing silence at their dinner table, the gentle touches that had become increasingly rare, or the way they both retreated to separate rooms each evening, buried in their devices instead of each other's company. Friends started noticing small changes. Hazel attended more events alone, always with a ready excuse about Kane's work commitments. She threw herself into her cases with an intensity that concerned even her most dedicated colleagues. At home, the nursery door remained firmly closed, the dreams it contained gathering dust along with the unused furniture. The signs were there, if anyone had looked closely enough. The way Kane's eyes would light up when checking his phone, how he began paying more attention to his appearance, buying new suits, and spending more time at the gym. The mysterious dinner meetings that couldn't be rescheduled, the business trips that seemed to get longer each time. But Hazel, devoted to her cases and still believing in their love story, chose not to see what was right in front of her. Their house, once filled with warmth and laughter, became a beautiful shell holding two increasingly separate lives. The dinner parties became less frequent, the conversations more superficial. The photographs on their walls seemed to mock them, capturing moments of happiness that felt increasingly distant. Yet they maintained the facade, experts at playing their parts in public while their private world slowly crumbled. It was a life that looked perfect from the outside. The successful power couple, the beautiful home, the enviable social circle. But behind the carefully curated social media posts and professional accolades, hairline fractures were spreading through the foundation of their marriage, threatening to shatter everything they'd built together. The other woman. The metamorphosis of Kane Williamson's life began on a mundane Monday morning when his company hired a new executive assistant named Madison Chen. She walked into the office wearing a crisp white blouse and confidence that commanded attention. At first, Hazel didn't worry. Kane had always had female colleagues and she'd never been the jealous type. But Madison was different. Madison possessed that rare combination of ambition and vulnerability that drew people in. She laughed at Kane's jokes with a musical lilt that made him feel witty and charming. During late-night project meetings, she'd bring him his favorite coffee, black with 2 sugars, something he'd mentioned only once in passing. She remembered details about his life that even Hazel sometimes forgot, like his sister's birthday or his preference for fountain pens over ballpoints. The changes in Kane were subtle at first. He started keeping an extra suit in his office for emergency meetings. His phone would be placed face down during dinner, but the notifications would light up the edge like silent fireworks. He began working out more, claiming it was stress relief from the new merger project. The cologne he wore changed to something younger, more sophisticated. Madison was everything Hazel wasn't, uncomplicated by heavy responsibilities, unburdened by the weight of social justice cases, and always available. She didn't challenge Kane's views or push him to examine his privileges. Instead, she made him feel like the hero of every story, the smartest person in every room. Their work relationship flourished in the grey areas of propriety. Late-night strategy sessions turned into dinner discussions about their dreams and fears. Quick coffee runs became hour-long conversations about childhood memories and future aspirations. Madison would touch his arm while laughing, and the contact would linger just a second too long. She'd adjust his tie before important meetings, her fingers brushing against his collar in a way that made his heart race. At home, Kane began comparing everything. Where Hazel's passion for justice once inspired him, he now found it exhausting. Madison's carefree attitude seemed refreshing in comparison. While Hazel spent evenings preparing court cases, Madison would send him funny memes about corporate life. The weight of his marriage, once a comfortable anchor, started to feel like a chain. Their office dynamic became the subject of water-cooler gossip. Junior associates noticed how Madison's eyes would follow Kane across the room during meetings. The security guards saw them leaving together well past midnight, claiming they were finalizing reports. The cleaning staff found 2 coffee cups on his desk most mornings, one with a faint imprint of lipstick. Kane started inventing business trips, conferences that didn't exist, client meetings that never happened. Instead, he and Madison would spend weekends in boutique hotels 2 cities over, where no one knew their names or their stories. He convinced himself it wasn't really cheating if there wasn't any love involved, but love has a way of growing in the darkest places. Madison began leaving subtle marks of her presence in Kane's life. A scarf accidentally left in his car, a notebook with her perfume lingering on its pages, private jokes that made him smile at his phone during family dinners. She became his confidant, the person he texted first thing in the morning and last thing at night. The guilt ate at him in quiet moments, when he'd catch sight of his wedding photo on his desk, or when Hazel would kiss him goodbye in the morning, her lips carrying the ghost of trust he no longer deserved. But Madison had become his addiction, a sweet poison he couldn't stop drinking. She represented everything he thought he wanted: youth, excitement, uncomplicated adoration. Their affair was a house of cards built on stolen moments and whispered promises. Madison talked about their future together, painting pictures of a life where they wouldn't have to hide. Kane found himself nodding along, even as part of him knew these were dangerous fantasies. She was 28 to his 40, with dreams as vast as the ocean and none of the wisdom that comes with weathering life's storms. Shattered trust. The annual corporate gala at the Grand Hyatt was supposed to be another perfect evening in the Williamsons' carefully curated life. Hazel had chosen a stunning deep burgundy gown that embraced her curves, her natural hair styled in an elegant updo. She spent extra time getting ready, hoping to recapture Kane's attention that had been drifting away like autumn leaves in the wind. The ballroom sparkled with crystal chandeliers and the hollow laughter of Atlanta's elite. Hazel noticed something was off the moment they arrived. Madison Chen was there, wearing a fitted silver dress that caught every light in the room. But it wasn't the dress that caught Hazel's attention. It was the way Kane's breath hitched when Madison walked past, the way his hand trembled slightly on his champagne glass. Throughout the evening, Hazel watched. She watched how Kane's eyes followed Madison across the room like a compass finding north. She watched their accidental encounters at the bar, the brief touches that seemed to burn with electricity. She watched Madison laugh at Kane's jokes with the kind of familiarity that only comes from countless private conversations. The truth revealed itself in fragments, like a mosaic of betrayal. It was in the way Madison knew Kane's favorite scotch without asking. It was in their synchronized movements as they navigated the crowded room, the dance of two people who had memorized each other's rhythms. It was in the private smile they shared across the dinner table, a smile that told stories Hazel wasn't part of. During the chairman's speech, Hazel excused herself to the powder room. There, in the artificial brightness of vanity lights, she found Madison touching up her lipstick, the same shade she'd once noticed on Kane's collar and convinced herself was from a coffee cup. "How long?" Hazel's voice was steady, even as her world was collapsing. Madison's hand froze, her eyes meeting Hazel's in the mirror. The younger woman's confidence wavered for just a moment before she replied, "He was never really yours, you know." Not completely. The walk back to their table felt like moving through water. The music had become a distant hum, the voices around her mere whispers compared to the thundering of her heart. Kane was there, checking his phone, probably looking for messages from the woman who had just shattered her world. Hazel waited until they were home. The grand foyer of their Victorian house, once a symbol of their success, now felt like a mausoleum of their marriage. She watched Kane loosen his tie, watched him move with the practiced ease of a man who thought he had gotten away with it all. "I know about Madison," she said, her voice echoing in the silence. "I know everything." The next hour was a hurricane of emotions. Kane's initial denials crumbled under the weight of evidence Hazel had gathered, not just from tonight, but from months of ignored signs. His defensive posture slowly gave way to something uglier as he realized he couldn't lie anymore. "You're never there anymore, Hazel," he spat, words sharp with accusation. "Always buried in your cases, always fighting someone else's battles. Madison understands me in ways you never tried to." The words hit like physical blows. Hazel thought of all the nights she'd waited up for him, all the gentle ways she'd tried to bridge the growing distance between them. "Understanding you wasn't the problem, Kane. The problem was you stopped wanting to be the man I married." Then came the cruelest cut. "Maybe I never was that man. Maybe we were both just playing parts in some progressive fairy tale. The successful black lawyer and the white businessman. Weren't we just trying to prove something to the world?" The room spun. Their wedding photos stared down from the walls, lies framed in silver and gold. Every happy memory seemed to crack and distort, viewed through this new lens of betrayal. The nursery upstairs, still waiting for the family they'd planned, now felt like a monument to dreams built on quicksand. "Don't you dare!" Hazel's voice was low, dangerous. "Don't you dare try to reduce what we had to some social experiment. I loved you, Kane. I loved you when you were nothing but potential and dreams. I loved you through the promotions and the late nights. I loved you even when I started seeing the signs, even when my friends tried to warn me." The night stretched on, filled with accusations and revelations. Kane's phone buzzed repeatedly, Madison wondering why he wasn't responding to her messages. Each notification was another crack in the foundation of their life together. By dawn, they had said things that could never be unsaid, exposed wounds that would never fully heal. Hazel packed a small bag as the sun rose, her movements mechanical. Their bedroom, once a sanctuary, felt tainted by questions of how many times he'd come home to her after being with Madison. She left her wedding ring on the dresser, a perfect circle of precious metal that no longer represented anything true. "You'll regret this," she said softly, standing in the doorway. "Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but someday you'll realize what you threw away, chasing something that was never real to begin with." The painful decision. Madison discovered the pregnancy on a rainy Tuesday morning, sitting alone in her luxury apartment bathroom, with 3 different pregnancy tests, all showing the same result. The chrome and marble bathroom, usually her favorite space in her carefully decorated home, suddenly felt cold and sterile. Her perfectly manicured nails dug into her palms as she stared at the tests, willing them to change. The irony wasn't lost on her. For months, she had been the other woman. Living in the shadows of Kane and Hazel's marriage, she had convinced herself that she was special, different from other mistresses. She told herself that Kane truly loved her, that their affair was destined to become something legitimate and beautiful. Now, life had handed her the ultimate plot twist, a baby that would make everything complicated in ways she hadn't planned for. Her first instinct was to call Kane, but her finger hovered over his contact name without pressing it. Since Hazel had confronted him at the gala, things had changed. Kane had become distant, distracted. Their passionate declarations of love had been replaced by brief, guilt-ridden encounters. The man who had promised her the world now seemed unsure of offering her even a moment of his time. For a week, she carried the secret like a stone in her chest. She watched Kane in the office, noticed how he'd aged years in the past month since Hazel left. His eyes had lost their sparkle, his jokes had become forced, and he'd taken to staring at his wedding photo when he thought no one was looking. Madison realized with growing dread that she was looking at a man who was regretting every choice that had led him to this moment. When she finally told him, it was after hours in his office. The city lights twinkled beyond his floor-to-ceiling windows, creating an almost romantic atmosphere that felt mockingly out of place. Kane's reaction was not what she had hoped for. Instead of pulling her close and promising to make everything right, he sat heavily in his chair, his face ashen. "I can't," he whispered, more to himself than to her. "I can't do this. Madison, I'm trying to fix things with Hazel. I've been seeing a therapist. I'm doing the work. I can't." The words hit her like physical blows. All her dreams of Kane leaving Hazel, of them building a life together, shattered in that moment. She saw herself clearly for the first time, not the sophisticated other woman she'd imagined herself to be, but a young woman who had foolishly believed that love built on betrayal could somehow end happily. Late that night in her apartment, Madison researched her options. Her hand rested protectively over her still flat stomach as she read through medical websites and support group forums. She thought about her career, her dreams, her life plans. She thought about raising a child alone, about the whispers that would follow both her and the baby in their social circles. She thought about Kane's obvious regret and withdrawal, about how any child deserved to be welcomed with joy, not treated as a reminder of past mistakes. The decision wasn't easy, but it felt right. She made the appointment without telling Kane. The clinic was in a different part of town, far from their usual haunts. The waiting room was filled with women from all walks of life, each carrying their own stories and reasons. Madison sat among them, no longer the polished executive assistant, just another woman making an impossible choice. The procedure itself was quick, but the emotional aftermath hit her harder than she'd expected. She took a week off work, citing a family emergency. In her apartment, she grieved not just for the pregnancy she had terminated, but for all her naive dreams and the love she thought she had found. She deleted Kane's personal number from her phone, removed all traces of their affair from her life. When she finally returned to work, she submitted her resignation letter. Kane found it on his desk one morning, along with a short note that simply read, "I made the choice that was right for everyone. I hope you find your way back to what matters." She had already accepted a position with a competing firm in Chicago, ready to start fresh where no one knew her story. The news of her choice eventually reached Kane through office gossip. He found himself standing in the empty nursery of his home, the one he and Hazel had painted with such hope, and the weight of everything hit him at once. The affair, which had seemed so exciting and right in the moment, had left a trail of destruction in its wake. Madison had been forced to make an impossible choice alone, while he had been too caught up in his own guilt and regret to even offer support. That night he wrote 2 letters, one to Madison, apologizing for his cowardice and wishing her well in her new life, the other to Hazel, finally taking full responsibility for his actions without excuses or justifications. Neither letter would fully heal the wounds he had caused, but they were the first honest words he had written in months. In her new Chicago apartment, Madison placed Kane's unopened letter in a box, along with other memories of her Atlanta life. She was building something new now, something authentic that didn't require hiding or pretending. Some nights she still thought about what might have been, but those thoughts came less frequently as time passed. She had learned the hard way that some loves are meant to teach us lessons, not last a lifetime. A mirror of truth. The Victorian house echoed with emptiness as Kane Williamson stood before the full-length mirror in what used to be their shared master bedroom. 3 months had passed since Hazel left, 2 weeks since Madison's departure, and he barely recognized the man staring back at him. His designer suits hung looser now, his face carried new lines etched by sleepless nights and endless regret. Tonight was different. After another session with his therapist, Dr. Reynolds, he'd been given a simple but devastating homework assignment: spend an hour truly looking at himself and speak his truth aloud. No excuses, no justifications, just raw honesty. The bourbon in his hand, his third of the evening, wasn't making it any easier. "Who are you?" he whispered to his reflection, his voice rough with emotion. The question bounced off the walls of the room where Hazel's feminine touches still lingered, her vanity now empty, her reading chair vacant, her scent fading from the curtains she'd chosen. The man in the mirror had once been the golden boy of Atlanta's business scene, Kane Williamson, the CEO who broke diversity barriers by marrying a brilliant black lawyer, who gave inspiring speeches about inclusion at corporate events, who seemed to embody the American dream of success and progressive values. Now he saw through that carefully constructed facade. His eyes fell on the family photos Hazel hadn't taken with her. Their wedding day, Hazel radiant in white, his own face beaming with what he'd thought was unconditional love. Holiday gatherings where his mother had finally embraced Hazel as a daughter. Charity galas where they'd been held up as an example of how love transcends racial boundaries. You were more in love with the image than the truth, he admitted to his reflection. You loved how being with Hazel made you look, the enlightened businessman, the progressive leader. But when it came to doing the real work, to truly understanding her struggles, her fears, her daily battles, you checked out. Moving closer to the mirror, he examined every line on his face. You chose the easy path with Madison. She didn't challenge you, didn't make you question your privileges or confront your biases. She just smiled and nodded and made you feel powerful. The bourbon glass shook in his hand as memories flooded back. Hazel trying to discuss microaggressions she faced at work, while he dismissed them as oversensitivity. The way he'd subtly discouraged her from wearing her natural hair to important business functions. How he'd felt secretly relieved when she was too busy with cases to attend certain social events where he knew his old money clients might be uncomfortable. You're a coward, he told his reflection, voice breaking. A coward who couldn't handle being married to a strong woman who made you question your own assumptions about the world. Behind him, the untouched nursery door stood ajar. They'd painted it together, arguing playfully about colors until they'd settled on a warm honeytone that would work for any gender. Hazel had wanted their future children to grow up proud of their mixed heritage, to understand both their privilege and their responsibility to fight for justice. He'd nodded along, but had he ever truly embraced that vision? His therapist's words rang in his ears. Redemption starts with radical honesty. Kane set down the bourbon and gripped the edges of the dresser until his knuckles went white. You didn't just betray your wife, he continued, forcing himself to maintain eye contact with his reflection. You betrayed everything she believed in, everything she thought you believed in. You took her trust, her love, her dreams of building a family with you, and you treated them like they were disposable. The photos on the dresser seemed to judge him, family gatherings, vacation snapshots, moments of joy now tainted by his actions. He picked up their last Christmas photo, taken just 6 months ago. Hazel's smile already showed signs of strain, though he hadn't noticed it then. And Madison, his voice caught, you used her too. Let her believe in promises you never intended to keep. Then abandoned her when she needed you most, just like you abandoned your vows to Hazel. Thunder rolled outside, a storm gathering over Atlanta. Kane watched rain begin to streak the windows, nature providing the tears he was still too proud to shed. The successful businessman, the supposed progressive leader, the unfaithful husband, all these versions of himself seemed to blur in the mirror's reflection. You have to fix this, he told himself firmly. Not for Hazel. She deserves better than your guilt. Not for Madison. She's rightfully moved on. You have to fix this, because if you don't face who you really are and do the work to change, you'll keep destroying lives, including your own. As lightning illuminated the room, Kane finally saw his truth with crystal clarity. His privilege hadn't just been about money or success. It had been about the luxury of never having to truly examine himself, of playing roles without embracing their meaning, of taking without giving back. The letter that changed everything. It took Kane 7 drafts before he wrote the letter that would finally reach Hazel. Each attempt ended up in the wastepaper basket, too full of excuses or empty promises. On this night, sitting at the antique desk they'd bought together in Savannah, he finally found the words that came from his transformed heart. My dearest Hazel, I've started this letter 100 times in my head and dozens more on paper. Each time, I found myself falling into the same patterns that helped destroy what we had, making excuses, trying to manage your perception of me, attempting to control the narrative. Tonight, I'm writing with nothing but truth, however ugly it might be. Kane paused, his Mont Blanc pen hovering over the cream-colored stationery. Through the study window, he could see the Japanese maple they'd planted together, its leaves now turning crimson in the autumn air. He continued, "First, I need you to know that this isn't a letter asking for reconciliation. You deserve better than that. This is a letter of acknowledgement, of my failures, my cowardice, and most importantly, of your incredible worth that I failed to honor. I've spent the past 3 months in therapy, not to win you back, but to understand why I betrayed everything we built together. The truth was harder to face than I expected. My affair with Madison wasn't about love or connection. It was about escaping the responsibility of being the man I promised to be when I married you. You challenged me to be better, to think deeper, to examine my privileges and biases. Instead of rising to that challenge, I retreated into a relationship that demanded nothing of me except my presence. Madison didn't ask me to understand systemic racism. She didn't push me to examine why all my board members were white men. She didn't question why I got uncomfortable when you wore your natural hair to corporate events. I chose the easy path, and in doing so, I not only betrayed our marriage, I betrayed everything you fought for, everything you believed I could be." His hand trembled as he wrote the next part. "The night you left, I said things that were unforgivable. I tried to diminish our marriage by suggesting it was some sort of social experiment. The truth is, I said those things because facing my own failures was too painful. It was easier to pretend our love wasn't real than to admit I had destroyed something precious and genuine. You were right when you said I'd regret my choices, but my regret isn't just about losing you. It's about failing to be the ally and partner you deserved. It's about disappointing the children we planned to have, children who would have learned strength, dignity, and integrity from their mother, while their father took the easy way out." Kane stood up, walking to the window. The street below was quiet, autumn leaves dancing in the gentle breeze. He returned to the desk, determined to finish. "Since you've been gone, I've made changes in my company. Real changes, not the superficial diversity initiatives I used to brag about. We've implemented blind recruitment processes, created mentorship programs for minority employees, established a scholarship fund for underprivileged students interested in business. These aren't attempts to win you back. They're steps toward becoming the man I should have been all along. I've also ended all contact with Madison, not because of you, but because I finally understood how I used her youth and admiration to avoid growing as a person. She deserved better than being my escape route from responsibility. You once told me that love isn't just about grand gestures and public declarations. It's about the daily choice to see and honor your partner's whole truth. I failed to make that choice every day I was with you. Instead, I chose comfort over growth, ease over responsibility, and cowardice over love." Tears finally fell, smudging the ink slightly as he wrote the closing paragraphs. "I don't expect forgiveness, Hazel. That's not why I'm writing. I'm writing because you deserve to hear the truth, that you were never the problem. Your strength, your conviction, your unwavering commitment to justice and truth, these weren't flaws to be tolerated, but gifts I was too small to appreciate. You deserve a partner who celebrates your whole self, who stands beside you in every battle, who sees your fire as inspiration rather than intimidation. I hope you find that person, even as I work on becoming that kind of man for whoever may be in my future. The divorce papers are signed, and with my lawyer. I've accepted all your terms without contest. It's the least I can do to honor the dignity with which you've handled this entire situation. Thank you for the years you spent trying to help me grow. I'm sorry I waited until losing you to finally start doing the work. With profound regret and eternal respect, Kane." He sealed the letter, his hands steady for the first time in months. Tomorrow, he would have it delivered to her law office, not to her home, respecting the boundaries she had set. Whether she read it or not was her choice. The important thing was that he had finally told the truth to her and to himself. Previous 6 headings remain the same. The long road back. 1 year passed like a slow-turning page. Kane and Hazel's divorce was finalized in spring, the same season they had married 6 years ago. But divorce papers couldn't sever the invisible threads that still connected them through their shared social circles in Atlanta's elite community. Kane dedicated himself to transformation with the same intensity he once applied to business deals. His weekly therapy sessions with Dr. Reynolds became the anchor of his schedule. The breakthrough came during a particularly difficult session. "I'm not doing this to get her back," Kane realized aloud. "I'm doing this because she was right about everything, about privilege, about responsibility, about what it means to be a true ally and partner." His company became a case study in corporate transformation. The board complained when he insisted on implementing ambitious diversity initiatives, but Kane stood firm. He hired consultants who specialized in anti-racism training, revised hiring practices, and established mentorship programs for minority employees. When an old friend made a racist joke at a golf club, Kane didn't laugh awkwardly like before. He called it out publicly. Hazel heard about these changes through mutual friends. She was building her own new life, having made partner at her firm and launching a non-profit focused on providing legal aid to underserved communities. Sometimes, during quiet moments in her new downtown condo, she would read Kane's letter again, noting how his actions were finally matching his words. Their first post-divorce encounter happened at a charity gala. Kane was there as a major donor to a scholarship program for minority students. Hazel was being honored for her pro bono work. Their eyes met across the room, and both felt the weight of everything that had changed. "You look well," she said when they finally spoke. "You look successful," he replied, noticing the quiet confidence that had always been there but seemed to shine brighter now. They talked for exactly 7 minutes about neutral topics: the weather, mutual friends, the charity's good work. But underneath the polite conversation lay a deeper understanding. They were both becoming better versions of themselves, separately. The tabloids occasionally tried to link them to other people. Kane turned down every introduction and setup, focusing instead on personal growth and community service. Hazel dated occasionally, but found herself more passionate about her work and advocacy than romantic relationships. Months turned into seasons. Kane's company won awards for its diversity initiatives. Hazel's non-profit expanded to 3 states. They learned to exist in the same city, to attend the same events, to share the same friends while maintaining respectful distance. Love reborn. It started with a crisis. A controversial police shooting rocked Atlanta's community, and Hazel's non-profit was leading the charge for justice. Kane watched her on the news, commanding attention as she spoke about systemic change and accountability. Without hesitation, he directed his company's resources to support her organization's efforts. This time, when they worked together, it was different. Kane listened more than he spoke. He used his privilege and connections to open doors, but let Hazel and her team lead the way. He stood beside her at rallies, not for show or praise, but because he finally understood the importance of being a true ally. Their reconnection wasn't romantic at first. They became partners in advocacy, their shared commitment to justice, building a new foundation of respect. Regular strategy meetings turned into occasional dinners. Professional emails evolved into thoughtful conversations about life, growth, and change. "I'm not the same man who hurt you," Kane said one evening, as they walked through the botanical gardens where they'd once been married. "I know," Hazel replied, "but more importantly, you're not pretending to be someone you're not anymore." Their second first kiss happened naturally after a community event where Kane had publicly challenged his business peers to do better, to be better. Hazel initiated it, recognizing in him the authenticity she'd always hoped to see. They took things slowly, building trust through actions rather than words. Cain attended Black Lives Matter meetings not as a CEO looking for good PR, but as someone committed to learning and supporting. Hazel watched him mentor young minority entrepreneurs, noting how he emphasized their voices rather than his own. When they finally decided to try again, they did things differently. They went to couples therapy before moving back in together. They had hard conversations about race, privilege, and responsibility. Cain learned to sit with discomfort rather than avoid it. Hazel learned to trust again, not blindly, but with eyes wide open. Their second wedding was smaller, more intimate. Instead of a society page spread, they requested donations to their joint foundation supporting racial justice initiatives. Cain's vows included a promise to always do the work, to never stop learning and growing. Hazel's included an acknowledgement of their journey and the strength they'd found in their scars. Today, they share their story with other couples, but not as a fairy tale of forgiveness. They present it as a testament to the hard work of genuine transformation, the importance of doing your own internal work before trying to rebuild a relationship, and the power of becoming the person you promised to be. Their new home office walls display both their original wedding photo and their second ceremony picture. Not as before and after shots, but as markers of a journey. Between them hangs a framed copy of Cain's letter, a reminder that sometimes you have to lose everything to find your truth. The nursery is painted different colors now, but the dream remains the same. To raise children who understand both privilege and responsibility, who know that love isn't just about feelings, but about daily choices and constant growth. Our story isn't about second chances, Hazel often says when people ask. It's about becoming who you were always meant to be, even if you have to take the longest road to get there. Cain usually adds, with hard-earned wisdom, and sometimes the longest road turns out to be the only one that leads you home.